welcome back to Block TV, where it is time for Crypto Globe. That's the place and time that we take a dip around the world to hear about the latest developments in the industry. To guide us on our tour today is Ethan Pierce, as we do every week with the director of the Paris-based Crypto Assets Institute. Ethan, thank you so much for being with us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Always a pleasure.
Entirely. And needless to say, the topics we're going to touch on today, sent by you rightfully so, is what I deem one of the most important moments in the race that is the race to a digital coin, and that's a Chinese roundup of what China has been doing over the course of the last week. Were you surprised by Xi Jinping, a big announcement that was very, seemed like a blockchain decree for the People's Republic?
Actually, not really, because it follows what we're seeing in a lot of places like Korea and elsewhere, which is this blockchain, not crypto conversation, where a distinct difference between, not just putting the two together and assuming that everything's going to always be crypto or always be a token or other things. So a lot of this is just really positive and aggressive news about China adopting blockchain-based solutions, but then also around the central bank digital currency discussion that continues to move forward. But it doesn't surprise me because even in places, like I said, with Korea or even Thailand, but others where the conversation around whether or not exchanges are legal, whether or not fundraising through tokens is legal, whether or not how do we deal with different tokenized assets, those conversations are being pushed over here, and over here we're just having the conversation about how blockchain can be part of a technology stack to solve problems. So not actually surprised at all.
No, I agree, and I think it's a good thing. I think that what it spelled to me, though, and I'm wondering with you as we touch on these things, that China actually has been in this game or planning this for quite a while, and it's all a lead up to the rumor, it's not even a supposition, but the rumor that the Chinese digital national coin is about to be launched before the end of the year, meaning in the next 3 months. Do you think that would be the case, this with both the crypto law being passed and this Chinese blockchain agenda all of a sudden?
Yeah, so, well, I think what's interesting is his words that China needs to seize the opportunity, quote unquote, around the blockchain, and that they need to speed up adoption of blockchain technology. So I think we can read a lot into that in terms of the strategy behind this and making sure that China takes the leading place and where this can go. As that takes us into the digital currency space, I think we can apply that as well, because very much the sentiment that seems to be coming out of this is that China wants to be able to compete on the global scale with the US dollar and the euro, but also wants to make sure that if Libra or when something like Libra launches globally, whether it is sovereign or not sovereign, that China has a place in that, and could the RMB digitally become a global currency? I think that that's definitely a big piece of where they want this to go. So I think this very aggressive stance on wanting to make sure that they're adopting as much blockchain technology as quickly as possible is extremely important. As far as looking at blockchain systems, but also crypto, he was very clear to say that they want this to have a top-down approach, meaning that this will all be centralized, this will all be managed by the government. So this is not going to be your anarchist
I was about to say,
Bitcoin maximalist
this
crypto.
Ain't no Bitcoin.
This is China crypto.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. This ain't no Bitcoin.
This is China crypto. But that's not necessarily a bad thing in terms of at least all of the benefits that can bring to an economy. It's already, the RMB is already rigidly controlled by the state. If they want to move that to a digital currency, which solves lots of other problems, then I don't think that's a bad thing. I think if we want to have a conversation around the RMB in general, that's different. But just making it digital, that doesn't really change how it's already managed. And yeah.
No, I said I completely agree. And not only that, it puts China in this forward position that if they are able to launch their digital national coin first for anybody else, they become more favorable. I'm asking you. That can solve, if that's easier to use in cross-border remittances, so to speak, they become the leading digital coin. We're theorizing right now, right?
Right. Well, I think there's still a lot of, obviously when it launches, and technically it already has, but I'll get to that in a second, is that it will be obviously the digital currency of China, be the official digital currency of China. Whether or not that can escape China and become global becomes there's issues on many levels, in terms of China also wants to be able to manage the amount of capital and wealth that
Right.
crosses the border, that exits China. And so even if they would love for the RMB to be digitally global, there still has to be some kind of mechanism to prevent or to manage Chinese citizens transferring non-digital RMB into digital RMB, sending that out of the country, and then turning that into euros or dollars or whatever. So I think that there's an interest there, but I think that there's a technology step and a regulatory step that'll have to be kind of managed. They just passed a crypto law that will go into place in January, go into effect in January, that is not actually about cryptocurrencies, but actually about cryptography in general, simply because they see how this is going to apply to other things, and it's just around the general blockchain question. So it's basically creating kind of a central authority for everything that is cryptographic in terms of the algorithms and the management of that. But in any case, they've come up with a standard for any kind of encrypted behavior, and the government will be managing that. That law will go into place in January.
And I wanted to ask you,
yeah, sure.
No, and I wanted to ask you because the one thing that I think one could see that also in Twitter conversations in the cryptosphere, as you sent to us the pledge loyalty to Communist Party on the blockchain, which I think is the perfect example. I know how the blockchain can be, misused. But what is your take on that?
Yeah. Well, I think it's curious. I mean, they just launched a dApp for members of the Chinese Communist Party to on a blockchain to immutably declare their allegiance to the Communist Party. It's called the Original Intentions On-Chain, published by the China Communist Party's propaganda office. So I think that's a curious thing. Again, is that bad in and of itself? I think it's interesting. This is a way for people to, blockchain is going to be a way for people to be able to immutably, transparently declare lots of things. China is a communist country. That is the system of government and the way that they wish to run everything. That is another discussion.
True.
Whether or not they have in place a tool for people to say, yes, I am a member of that party. I think that's interesting in the sense of we're moving forward to, in the US, then I could declare that I'm a Democrat or a Republican, which I wouldn't. But you could have apps where you could, say these specific things, and everywhere else in life be able to identify as such. This ability to be pushing any kind of attestation or agreement or adherence to any kind of an idea, and have that be stored on a blockchain to potentially be publicly available. I think that's an interesting thing. Afterwards, we can discuss and dispute government and how that works and how we feel about it. But in and of itself, that doesn't bother me. But I think what's really interesting here, yeah?
No. In it, and firstly, I completely agree. I think, it's a perfect way of proving that the blockchain is great, has many possibilities in it for societies. It boils down to everything else in new technology, how we choose to use it. It's how we choose to use it, and the country is entirely entitled to use it however way it wants. I think one thing that we're learning here, though, is that China is ahead of the game in blockchain, right? Of course, they're good.
So they just published.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, they just published this to be ahead of the game, a list of 506 enterprise blockchain projects. So they created another office that you have to register any kind of a blockchain app or project on, and they have 506 to date. Lots of stuff in fintech and remittance and different things, but also around logistics and supply chain management, health, all kinds of different places. But you've got all the major banks in there. You've got Alibaba and Baidu and Tencent, and then lots of startups. So 506 projects that are on this list. It's clear, and some of them are really significant, backed by significant players. So
such as,
so all of that stuff.
Give me the examples. When you say some of them are quite significant, backed by significant players.
Well, you've got all the main banks of China that have launched it, that have at least one or two projects on the list. So Bank of China, the Agricultural Bank of China, all the main heavyweights of the economy on the banking side. And then with Alibaba, Baidu, and Tencent, you represent all of the major e-commerce platforms, messengers, and digital payment providers, all wrapped up in those three. So the simple fact that they each have projects in place to look at how to manage digital payments or remittance or anything around supply chain or the tracking of packages on the logistics side to healthcare and the data that's linked to that, all these different pieces. I think it's just very interesting that of these enterprise projects, a tremendous amount of them are corporate or scale up. Yep. With a lot of money being put behind them. So that plus the message from their government saying that we need to even speed up this adoption and we need to be the leader of this globally, it definitely looks like they're moving very much forward and aggressively. And to the point of all this whole funnel is, according to Box Mining, and a bunch of documents in Chinese that they had posted, it's actually already launched. The Chinese, the central bank digital currency of China, which they're calling the digital currency electronic payment, DCEP. It is currently in a closed launch with banks and other financial institutions to roll it out and to test it. But this thing is now out there, according to the documents. I can't read them, but I'm trusting that that's what what they're saying. So if that's true, that's extremely interesting, and it really follows all the stuff that's really been discussed up until now. That it's this is pegged 1-to-1 to the RMB. It is not a third-party stable coin. This is all about the ability to make digital payments linked to real currency. This is a way for the banks and the financial institutions to recover some of the market that they've lost to WePay and Alipay. Right. But to also do two, I think, very interesting things, which one is that the way that it's supposed to work on the payment side is that it's an NFC-enabled offline payment solution, meaning that you don't necessarily need an internet service provider at the moment that you want to pay somebody with DCEP, and that you don't have to have a bank account tied to that account. So this is also going to solve a large part of the unbanked problem in China, which is unbanked but also unconnected. So most likely those can often go together, but you could be unbanked and still have an internet connection, but the issue is both of those are solved theoretically in what they're rolling out here. I think that's pretty cool.
No, and I think it's amazing. I think China has entirely, moved ahead with this, and when we look at this roundup and what's expected. But I want us to move to Argentina because China entirely, that was the week of China. Argentina, on the other hand, trying to stabilize the peso by limiting access to $200 per month for, in the country. And Bitcoin trading, of course, has jumped. What do you make of that? Because, we are broadcasting, obviously, from the Middle East. It's not trading, but in a country in this region, Lebanon, right now, large sums of money, of dollars, were just banned from being taken out of the country. That's always a place where I think that Bitcoin jumps in and people start to use it more. But what is happening in Argentina right now?
So this is exactly, it's a very similar situation. So because of the crazy inflation that they have this year, I think it's 50% annual inflation currently. In September, they put into place a $10,000 capital limit on being able to buy US dollars for savings or to transfer them out of the country or whatever you might want to do. And they just dropped that to $200. Simply because of the run that was starting to happen with some of that and wanting to prevent that from happening. And not to be surprised then, we now see this past week was the third highest trading volume ever for Bitcoin. And is trending to be probably the first if it continues in this direction, simply because if we're going to block access to fiat, then more and more we're seeing how people are just going to work around that. So I think that that's a very interesting situation because it highlights one of the main concerns of central banks around having a global digital currency, whether it is sovereign or non-sovereign, and that is we take away the power of them to control the currency for good and for bad. Potentially, we need to stabilize currencies in delicate, disruptive moments to keep the economy moving.
And Ethan, also a use case scenario for blockchain, something that we've all been looking for years. You pointed out something very interesting that is fairly new. A blockchain startup just raised $5 million to automate airport security checks. How?
Yeah, so what we kind of think that Big Brother watches us every step of where we go, but the reality is in airports, the airlines, security, border control, all of them don't actually have an efficient, secure way to pass validated information between them without necessarily revealing identities. And so this startup, which is called Zemna, it's previously called VeChain, but that's VeChain, not VeChain, so not to be confused in case we see that roaming around in the reports.
Exactly.
They've raised $5 million. What's interesting is not just that they've raised it, and this is why the story I thought was good, but when we talk about practical use cases, it's also about deployment. And it was raised by some interesting VCs, but also with international airlines group, which is British Airways, Iberia, and Vueling, and then also one of their clients that they have on board is Emirates. So if you combine all that together, this is already an interesting potential to roll out this idea. And the concept would be to, using the technology that they have in place, be able to have an encrypted identity that can go from airline to security to border control without necessarily revealing your identity, but being able to validate that you are who you are, and to reduce by up to 90% the actual manual document checks that have to take place in all those different processes. And if that can, if and not really an if, but when, because that seems like an obvious use case. Sure. That's a very transactional process going through check-in and security, border control, and getting on the plane. All those different transactions could easily be tied to a unique identifier that, if that's been validated and we can prove that that's you, that is that thing, that's a fantastic use case. Could dramatically speed up the ability to go through airport security. I mean, we already have this in the US with, the ability to pay to be put onto a list and to be pre-approved to be able to walk through security in a special queue and all those kind of things. But that's still a manual process. But if we can automate that and blockchain it, then that gets pretty cool. But the simple fact that it's tied to a very large conglomerate in the airline space, with IAG, but also Emirates, which Emirates is interesting because as a use case for them, Emirates is all of it. When you're in the Dubai airport, the airport, the security, and Emirates, it's all the government. So the ability for them to potentially put in place an end-to-end use case is pretty cool to see. So hopefully we'll see some cool stuff advance with that and get to the airport a little bit faster and maybe a little bit more securely.
Or as we said, just in the case with China, as you argued, rightfully so. I mean, it really is how you use the blockchain. In that respect, we cannot expect people with a certain agenda, governments or companies, to not, use their agenda on the blockchain that way. That advances a use case. If that cuts time down in the airport, I think everybody's buying. Ethan,
just to connect all of that together, the problem isn't that things are centralized. It's whether they're centralized with good actors. So do people have a problem with Libra, or do they have a problem with Facebook being above Libra, which is only partially true, but in the sense of they're being connected to it, that whole conversation. I'm not worried about Facebook Libra any more than I'm worried about Visa Libra, Uber Libra, all the different members Libras, and I'm actually worried quite a bit about that, but Libra itself. So yeah, I think it really comes down to intent, and what I love about a lot of these stories this week is just that we are actually seeing real use cases, real applications. Things are moving forward in really cool ways. And now it just has to be a matter of making sure that we have transparency and oversight of these things so that people behave well.
Exactly. Couldn't have said it better. Ethan Pierce, thank you so much once again for joining us from Paris, as you do once a week. Very informative. We were BLOCKTV. We'll be right back.
For more news and updates, follow us on Twitter.